And I think likability is the precursor for everything, because people will be less likely to help you if you're not likable.
I agree, but I think likability takes on many forms. And also, if you're too likable, then it actually doesn't work in your favor because people, I think, treat you like a doormat, right?
If someone brings enthusiasm to a situation or positivity, automatically they're going to be more likable than someone who's a negative Nelly. That's the first thing. Okay.
Great.
I think the second thing is humility. Welcome to this solo duo episode that we're doing today with my friend Lee Trink.
Hi.
Hello, Lee.
How are you, Jen? Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Lee teases me.
Thanks for inviting me to your solo.
You're welcome. He keeps on teasing me because he says it's not a solo.
I don't know. I'm sitting here. What do I know?
I know, but like I said in an earlier episode, that it's more to have someone to kind of debate with and go back and forth, and we used to call them solos. So you're right. Just thank you for joining me on this shorter episode.
My pleasure.
Okay. Today's topic is going to be on likability, and this is why. It's my belief that in order to achieve your most ambitious goals, no matter what they are, before you have the grit, before you have the tenacity, before you have the boldness, the precursor to any of that is likability. Because if you're not likable, you're unable to have the boldness, let's say, to get away with certain things or to ask for certain things, because people will be less likely or will be less likely to help you if you're not likable. So what my first question to you, that's my opinion. I think likability is the precursor for everything. Would you tend to agree or disagree?
So I agree, but I think likability takes on many forms. And also, if you're too likable, then it actually doesn't work in your favor because people, I think, treat you like a doormat, right? Like, I think defining what likability is important. I think the other thing I would say about people is some people like assholes. Like,
You've done well.
I mean, look, there are plenty of people that would call me an asshole.
I was going to say, you know what? There's always an anomaly.
I mean, it's true. Now, look, it's true. But I would also say that, like,
do you think you're an asshole?
No, I don't think I'm an asshole. But I bet there are people who think I'm.
Why?
Who think
Why
I'm
do
an
you think
asshole.
people think you're an asshole?
I don't know, because I think that I'm confident, and sometimes people will confuse confidence for arrogance. And I don't think I'm arrogant, but I think that I'm confident, and I think I own my own shit. And believe me, I'm very far from perfect, but I own my own shit. And
you know what it is about you? You're aloof.
I am aloof.
That's the word, aloof.
Yeah.
I think people mistake arrogance for aloofness.
Sometimes,
you could be aloof and people think you're arrogant.
Yeah. It depends on the context too, right?
Okay, but do you think your aloofness or quote unquote arrogance, let's just say, has worked to your advantage?
I think it's probably a mixed bag. I don't think I've ever suffered from a likability problem, right? I think that whatever it is, the full composite is interesting enough. Like, I think sometimes being interesting and maybe magnetism is another quality. Maybe it's a component of likability, or maybe it's a counterbalance, right? Because I think if there are people, and forget about me, I don't want to sit here and talk about me, but just thinking about people that other people gravitate towards, right? I think that there's sometimes magnetism in those people that comes with some other stuff that maybe, if you talk about those traits, are not that likable. Like, maybe part of the reason I say that is where, my background working with a lot of musicians and rock stars, like, that is magnetism. Likability is kind of not, their rules of likability are not the same for regular people. And I think that also is the same for for people in general. Like likabilities can take on different forms.
Okay, I'll tell you something that's interesting. So, I listened to Jared
Leto.
Leto, on Smartless the other day. I think I told you.
Yeah.
So just quickly, Lee used to manage like still
No, I helped break 30
so
Seconds to
great. Okay,
Mars
so
as an artist. And
right, and Kid Rock and a bunch of these people, Katy Perry, a bunch. But I was gonna say I listened to Jared, and he was very likable on the Smartless podcast. Why? And this is where I'm going to get into it. I found him to have a lot of humility. He had a sweet. He sounded to have like a softness and a sweetness about him. Um, and he had this like aw shucks type of thing, and he also portrayed a good work ethic. So if that to me, that's what made him feel likable. Now I know just as well as you do that perception is not always reality, and optics are optics. But if he's going for being likable, I think those are really key touch points to have. And so at least he knows, he has a wherewithal to know that to be likable, he has to have these certain things. Now, I guess my first question is he really those things?
Oh, I think so. Look,
Okay.
I would also say he's one of the toughest guys I've ever worked with, right? But he's also one of the most hardworking. So, there are things that balance each other out.
Right.
Like again, really difficult, but has a point of view and is able to deliver and does the work himself. So I say, okay, I'll take the sum of those parts.
Okay, so that's interesting, right? So then let's break it down. Like, what, in your opinion, do you think makes somebody likable?
I think I think that there's not a one size fits all in likability. I think some people make that aw shucks. I don't think he's an aw shucks likable guy. I
He
mean,
was
look,
on that podcast.
I
I
mean,
will
it's
tell you,
interesting. I should listen to
I
it.
told you to listen
Yeah,
to it
I know.
because he came
But I mean, he's like a
across
mega. Like the guy is like an Oscar winning, actor and rock star. Like
and the most beautiful human being on the planet. The
you
guy's
kind
52 years old.
you can't get further away from aw shucks than but look, he's not, and I also think in a way he's gotten nicer in some ways because he's accomplished so much, and I think that also helps, right? Like
Well,
if you're
he
talking
came a
about the
long
ultra
way. He
successful.
came a long way from my
Yeah.
so-called life, number one.
Yeah,
Okay.
for
Like that was
sure.
definitely not like like we all probably, like me as a girl, like we all had the biggest crush on him. We thought would never see him again. Like he looked like he was a one hit, thing that just with a pretty face. Next thing, who knew he was like this amazing actor, this amazing musician. And by the way, on that podcast, he was talking about how he climbed the Empire State Building. Like, I mean, like, it's like, but legit, like,
Yeah.
climbed it. But the reason why I'm saying that is, let's just take it back a second, because I think that you think that there's a whole different, like, soup of a variety of different qualities that make somebody likable depending on the situation. I still
I
believe
do.
you, right? I
Yeah,
believe
I think whatever the 100% of likability is, there's a dozen different traits. You can have one of them, three of them, six of them in whatever combination, and you make it work as a package.
Okay, so let's just say there's a menu, right? I still think there's foundationally things that make people likable. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I think that if someone is not that likable, they can improve their likability by working on some core elements.
I agree with that.
Okay? So one of the elements that I think that makes somebody exceptionally likable is enthusiasm. If someone brings enthusiasm to a situation or positivity, automatically they're going to be more likable than someone who's a negative Nelly. That's the first thing. Okay.
Great.
I think the second thing is humility. That's why when Jared Leto showed humility to me, I found it to be something that I took note of. I think, the idea that you're not braggadocious, that you have a humbleness about you, I think it's very, very attractive. And it doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl. The other thing I think is super likable is someone who's very generous with your time, generous with not money, but just like generous in like your thoughts and your time, and always available to be generous to help somebody. Those are some of the, I mean, there's other ones as well.
So I want to push back on some of those, on the requirement of, if you're saying those are like requirements for
No, not
likability,
required. Those are
the
the
kind of
key,
foundational
like,
core, yeah.
and there's other ones too.
Yeah.
I think there are other ones too. But I think that to me is,
Let me give you an example of one trait that can make up for deficiency and even like the wrong the wrong direction of some of those traits.
okay,
Sense of humor. I think if you have a sense of humor, that makes up for a lot of things. First of all, people,
totally
they
agree.
can't
I
help
agree.
themselves. If you can make somebody laugh, you disarm them from a lot of things. And so if you are somebody with no humility, but you have a good sense of humor, it's just disarming enough, and people will like you despite the fact that there are traits that they dislike about you.
Totally true. Name somebody that you think of, like think of somebody that you know who has a really good sense of humor, but like is kind of like an asshole.
Look, I'm going to go back to just
You?
well
No,
known.
joking.
No, I mean, I think
Joking.
I think I use humor sometimes to do that.
I'm
I think
joking.
I
You're not
use
that
humor.
funny.
I'm not as funny as I used to be. That's another
That's a
issue.
whole
That's
other
a whole other
podcast.
podcast. But I'm going to pick, instead of picking up, Joe Schmo that nobody knows, I'll pick somebody that people know, like Kid Rock. Kid Rock is funny. Kid Rock can also be a huge asshole. And
Yeah.
now, look, if putting aside the rock star factor that nobody can just add on to themselves, right?
Yeah.
Which also kind of masks up. People tolerate a lot of stuff, but even forget about that. Let's talk about like our friends
Mhm.
who that rock star part doesn't really matter much to them. But he can be an asshole. But his antidote to that is he is funny. He's really funny, and that is a counterbalance. And he's not always an asshole. He happens to have some of those other traits that you talk about. He is generous. He's generous with his friends. He's generous with his time. He's generous with his money in being a philanthropist. Although he doesn't talk. But I think if we're talking about humor, he uses humor really well. Frankly, even Jared is funnier than most people would think he is. Because that's not what he portrays.
Right.
What he leads with is not humor. Sometimes, I would even say that about me. Like, I don't necessarily lead all the time with humor.
No, you do not.
Some people might find it surprising that I'm funny, or that I think I'm funny.
I would never describe you as funny,
Wow,
but you're
thanks.
humorous. Like you could be like very, I know when you're in a good mood because you're more levity to you, but
Yeah.
that's another one, levity. I think when people have
Yeah.
levity, but I think the sense of humor to me is such a good one.
Yeah, you don't need it to be likable, but boy, is it great in your bag of
That's
tricks.
a really true. Okay, name another one.
Another trait.
Yeah.
Maybe this is related to funny, but it's not. If you're like, there's a friend of mine now that is he's just fun. He's a guy
Do I
when
know
you're
him?
sitting at my buddy Joe. I don't know if
I know
you've
you
ever
talk
met
about him
him.
all the time. I
Yeah.
don't know him.
So like, he's a guy that you could sit at a table, and he'll turn whatever these objects into a game. Right? He does things like that all the time, and it's silly and it's goofy, and it's not like, he's just fun. He's always looking for fun, and he's somebody people gravitate to. By the way, he's a huge pain in the ass. Huge. He's one of the biggest pains in the asses that I know. And people tolerate it from, they tolerate things from him that they don't tolerate from anybody. I'm really doxing, I'm doxing my friend, but all my friends would agree. We tolerate things from Joe because he's fun to be around.
He's fun to be around.
Even if he makes it excruciatingly difficult,
Okay,
even to coordinate time with.
Okay, I thought, you know what? I didn't say one that I think is really important is authenticity. I think if someone has authenticity, they're a real person, that is automatically likable in a real way. Because like what I was going to say earlier was that if you're funny and have a great sense of humor, yeah, like you're super likable to someone maybe on the surface. Like, oh my God, I love them. They're so funny. And so like I would like to hang out with them, or like I get a kick out of them. But like, would I take it a step further and actually want to be really close friends with them? That's like a different level of likability. So I think when someone is actually authentic and real, that like makes somebody not just likable, but someone that you really, really want to invest time in and
Because
build a
they're the
friendship and
same. Like,
relationship with.
I think part of it is consistency, right? Like authenticity is kind of akin to consistency. It means that like who they purport to be is who they really are. So you're not going to
Yeah.
get some random, you're not going to get some volatile personality or some differing personality. So you feel more confident investing time in them because you're like, this is the genuine article. This is person it, and also it makes you, I think it's part of magnetism, right? People gravitate to authenticity and people reward it, right? People reward authenticity in a world that's kind of increasingly, Instagram versus
Phony.
reality.
Phony, exactly. Okay, so what qualities would you say make someone really unlikable besides
I,
phoniness?
yeah, I think phoniness is one of the worst,
One of the
right? Like,
worst.
if people think you're phony, most people are just out unless they need you. Unless they need you, most people are out.
Do you know what I think is really a dislikable quality? I think pretentiousness. I think
Yeah.
it's such an ugly quality. And why there's such a disconnect for me is that like so much of Instagram and social media is based around this like pretense that you have a lot of money, that you have a plane, that you have like this nice house, when all of these things could be rented by the hour and most people know it. And yet they're being applauded for these things. Like I guess the disconnect for me is like the pre even though pretentious people are such an unlikable trait, it's been like glamorized with social media. I don't get it.
So I'm gonna play a little devil's advocate because there's not a one size fits all. There are plenty of pretentious people who hang out amongst themselves. That's the language
Yeah,
they
it's true.
use.
Good point.
It's like they're peacocking for each other, right? And
Yeah.
they're I would say there's probably country clubs that are like filled with pretentious people, and not to paint with a
That's
broad
so true though.
brushstroke,
You're right. And
right?
they kind of like birds of a feather
Yeah,
flock
they flock
together.
together, right? So like then it becomes like,
Are you pretentious?
I don't think so. I think I'm not. I think I'm earnest. But look, I
Poor Lee,
again
he's in
not
the hot seat.
no, but I think that I think I'm misunderstood by a lot of people, but it doesn't. It also I'm not really. It doesn't concern me because
Right.
it's never slow. Like I think whatever the composite of what I am is interesting enough for people. I have no shortage of friends, no shortage of opportunities, and so like
Totally.
if any of those things are a problem, they're a problem for me and things in my own head rather than an obstacle to anything. But I don't think I'm pretentious. I think that I'm actually quite earnest and I think almost the what is a sign of being not pretentious, which I think is something that I do constantly, is I'm self-deprecating. Back to Jared Leto, he's extremely self-deprecating, and that's disarming for
Yes.
people.
So that's okay. So let's say that. Let's like leave it with that because I think
By the
that's
way,
such a good
so
point.
is Kid Rock to some extent, self-deprecating.
So I think that's a really great one too. Being self-deprecating disarms people. So I guess at the end of the day, what makes somebody likable is their ability to be self-deprecating enough to disarm, or not self-deprecating, sorry, is their ability to be disarming enough. Like you could have basically you could have any negative quality, but if you are disarming enough, then you can get away with it.
I go back to what I said before. There are a dozen, maybe there's 20 traits. And as long as your cocktail tastes good at the end, whatever ingredients
That's
you
funny.
pull in and counterbalance your flaw. Look, we all have flaws. We all have things that we don't like about ourselves, maybe other people don't like about us. But if you can kind of mix that cocktail in a way that tastes good for people, that's it. And it means that you don't, you can have a glaring hole in that list, even in some of the foundational ones, if you've got this other trick up your sleeve that you're great at. Like again, the humor like almost will cover. Like
Totally
if
true. I
you're
agree with
like
you.
almost the funnier you are, and I'm not talking about slapstick or like slip on a banana peel funny. Like that's not what people value. But if you're funny enough, that genuinely can make up for so many shortcomings. And look, frankly, if you think about comedians tend to be, again, painting with a broad brushstroke, fairly damaged people,
Oh, totally. I
right?
agree.
Like,
Yeah.
like if you talk to people that have personal relationships with or romantic relationships with
Yeah.
comedians, they'll give you chapter and verse about what a nightmare somebody is. but being funny as hell covers up for a lot of it.
1000%. By the way, I don't know if you knew this or not, but I moved to LA because I got a job to work with a comedy manager because my biggest obsession is like stand-up comedy. I love comedy more than anything. I love to laugh. I love stand-up. And I moved to LA. I was working with a really big agency, a very well-known one, and a big comedy manager. I literally lasted 7 days, and that was even too long because the actual business of it and what you really when you peel back the curtain, or you like you peel back the whatever that is, the onion, whatever, and you see what actually happens in these people's real lives, it's so different than what you think. You think because they're hilarious on stage,
Well, that's
they're going to
always
be
the case.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not.
Mostly
right?
they're depressed.
Yeah. No, they're
and
yeah,
difficult
yeah.
and super neurotic.
Yeah.
That I literally was like, okay, I'm out. I want to do this as a hobby, as a pastime, but not as a job because of that.
It's funny, if I think back of like one of the things I've missed in my careers that I would have loved to participate in, and it's never too late, but is comedy. Like I'm a student of comedy. I like the math of comedy. I think comedy is math to some extent. I like and I never thought of myself as a stand-up comedian. Like that's not the direction. I don't think that, but the business of comedy and I'm infatuated with comedy, and I've always thought back and said, man,
you can still do it.
Of course, yeah. I almost joined Groundlings late in like a decade, like maybe less than 10 years ago.
Why didn't you ever do it then?
I was busy, but yeah.
You could do it now.
I suppose I'm busy now too.
Well, you'll always be busy.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, this is we're going to do a whole but our next podcast is going to be about that.
Comedy?
Yeah.
Or about missed opportunities.
Opportunities.
Yeah, I don't even know if I don't want to call it a missed opportunity. I would just say a road not traveled, right? Like, I have a good idea for a podcast for us, although I actually started thinking about writing a book about it. But
really? Okay, well, we should do it then.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Lee, we got to wrap this because they're supposed to be short solos / duos. So guys, if you are listening to this podcast, by the way, if you've not subscribed yet to the podcast, please do so. Leave a review. That always helps us with rankings. So I would really appreciate if you can do that. And always leave a feedback, comment, whatever, because I'm always very curious to hear what you have to say. And thank you. And if you have any suggestions, always give me a suggestion. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.